Welcome, everyone. Today I have with me Chris from 6-7 Podcast. Chris, thank you so much for being here. I am so excited to talk to you today.
I'm excited to talk to you too, Cheryl, and thank you so much for having me on. I really am looking forward to this. I love this topic.
So, I reached out to you a long time ago. I could say that you kind of crushed my dreams, but but for good reason. So, in my kind of awakening of things, I was not to get too into politics or anything, but I was super, super liberal. And then I had this awakening of, oh my goodness, I'm pro Trump. And I thought like the world was great now. The water was fine over here. It was friendly and happy. I was happy to be there. And then I stumbled upon you, and you have a podcast. And what I loved about your podcast is that you actually back everything up with receipts, as you call them, if I remember right, because I went through them all. And you kind of crushed my dreams because you were like, listen, it's two wings of the same bird. It's two different sides of the same coin. We're in this kind of as people on our own, but together. Which now I can say that I'm comfortable in that fact, and getting more and more comfortable as the days go on. And homeschooling is just one of the things that I can do to be more comfortable in that fact. If we can't depend on the government to make the right choices for us, we have to do it ourselves. And I think homeschooling is a way to do that. So I reached out to you. Well, I reached out to you many times over the last couple of years because of your podcast. It just always provoked more questions in my mind, which was awesome. And you were so nice to always answer me. And I brought you on today to talk about kind of the history of education because to know everything else. So lay it on us.
Well, I know a few things, put it like that. I know the more I learn, the more I know how I don't know anything. But yes.
Right.
Yeah, it's funny you say that, you were a liberal and then you kind of realize, oh my gosh, I think I support Trump, which in and of itself is its own entire traumatic experience.
Yes.
And then when
Yes, it
you
was.
hop the broom again to go, oh wait, there are two wings to the same bird, you're like, ah. It kind of leaves everybody in no man's land, so to speak, as to
Yeah.
what to do.
Yes.
But as
Which is
far
why I
as
came to you.
Oh, well, thank you. But as far as the education system, yeah, this is a wonderful topic, and the history of our education has been something that I've kind of been a little fascinated in, as my father and my grandmother on my mom's side were both educators. And so,
Okay.
people would often tell me, oh, there's different gifts of the spirit, and teaching is one of them. Oh, you're the teacher. You're definitely a teacher. I'm like, oh, okay, thank you. I mean, yeah, sure. Yeah. No. But I am starting to see just how important a good, honest, open minded, um, well studied teacher actually is. So
Mhm.
here we are. So what kind of we can dive into it. Do you have a specific question, or what would you just
So,
like me to share my info on the history of education?
so first of all, I mean, we think in our minds that this being in a school building for 6, 7, 8 hours a day has just always existed. And to veer away from that and teach your kids at home is completely out of this world. But when you really look into it, it's only been around about 120 years, which I mean, that's a couple of grandparents ago. Is that
Yeah,
correct? Am I right
and
in that
maybe a
assessment?
grandparent or two. Yeah, you're absolutely right. And it's funny you mentioned that because I was just talking with some friends yesterday about how much I believe our perception of history has been adjusted just in the last 150 or so years, since somewhere in the late 1800s, 1870s, 1880s, somewhere around then, a tremendous shift happened. And I'm still putting my finger on exactly all the things that seem to have changed around that, but education is
Mhm.
definitely one of them. And you're right. Everybody was educated at home and via a trade almost exclusively prior
Mhm.
to the Rockefeller education system really transforming the media and the perception of education, not even education itself, just the perception of education. I use my wife's grandmother as an example. So, my wife is from Sweden, and her grandmother is what's called native Swedish. So most people assume that most all Swedes are blonde hair, blue eyed, the typical Swedish look. And that is true for modern day Swedes, but native Swedish actually don't have blonde hair or blue eyes. And they're much more they look a lot more like Eskimos or Inuits or something like that
Oh,
than
interesting.
a typical Swede. But she talks about how her grandmother repeatedly says, "Oh, when I was a young girl, all we had was 3 years of school, like
Okay.
kindergarten, first and second grade, or something equivalent. 3 years of school that focused on reading, writing, and I think just basic math, like arithmetic, basic arithmetic principles. But everything immediately following you understanding how to read, write, and do basic math was all about learning something to be useful, like learning a trade. So yeah, it's a very like I mean, her grandmother's still alive to this day. Like she hops on Facebook from time to time. We talk to her on
Oh, wow.
FaceTime. So it's like there's generations of people who are still presently alive who only had 3 years of school, and this all came before the traditional institutional school model was applied to the
Wow.
West. So it's not even nearly as old. This concept of going to a school for several hours, going from grade kindergarten all the way through 12th grade and then into graduate or postgraduate school is a very, 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 very new concept.
And you mentioned the Rockefellers. So that's really important because they started taking the oil money and saying, hey, let's give it to your educational institution. But wait, do you mind if we throw a couple of our folks on the school board? We just want to know what you're doing with our money. And
Our
then as
money.
time went on, it was every textbook said Rockefeller on it.
Hmm. Yep. And they did the same thing with the medical institution, and they did the same thing with like several other industries, but particularly education. And so you're absolutely right. So for any of your listeners who might not be familiar with who and exactly what the Rockefeller dynasty, we'll call it, interested in doing, John D. Rockefeller, who's considered the patriarch, if you will. He's not the patriarch, but he's definitely the one who cranked it from second gear to fifth gear and like took it all over the moon, if you will.
Okay.
He was an oil tycoon, and he was a pretty shrewd businessman, and he was known for monopoly, like developing monopolies in a season where there was no antitrust laws or laws against such business
Hmm.
practice. And he basically said, listen, we got all this oil money. We need to find a way to secure how the oil money keeps coming. So he took assets and he partnered in certain cases with the Hearst's family or certain um, Carnegie family members, like railroad tycoon people at the time, newspaper tycoon people at the time, in the case of the Hearst family. And what they did was say, listen, like you said, we're going to sponsor and subsidize these medical schools. We're going to sponsor and subsidize these traditional schools. And we would like to put members on the board of directors of these various institutions, the AMA in the case of medicine, the school board, or just the general school board in the case of schooling, and ensure that our investments are being treated, you know, as any good investor would want their money to be treated, which really was, in hindsight, we're able to see a way of maneuvering the conversation so that education came squarely through this one lens, and chiefly for the primary industry. So it wasn't just about like, oh, I want to control all of education. It was, oh, I want to control all of education to make sure that people don't get too smart and figure out how to innovate around my oil industry. And so that at the same time, I can create people just smart enough to work for me, but not too smart to outwork me. And that
Interesting.
was his pretty effective, if you ask me, way of securing his financial hegemony, which to this day still runs and is still the norm. And then when you back that up with um, the media, the advertising, the whole Madison Avenue concept of saying you don't want your kid educated by any Tom, Dick, and Harry, do you? You want them at a state-sponsored Rockefeller accredited institution. And the same they did for
Hmm.
doctors. When my wife and I were first considering having a home birth with our daughter, we were learning essentially this whole hustle ran through the medical institution. You don't
Hmm.
want just any doctor delivering your baby at home. You want a certified doctor at the hospital. And that
Hmm.
concept has like it worked like psychologically. Women were like, oh, clutching my pearls. I guess I don't want just anybody. Whereas
Yeah.
from antiquity up until basically 100 years ago, everybody was born at home. And the
Yes.
same with education. Everybody was educated in a way that made sense for their family, right? What purpose to your family's farm or your family's heirloom food mission is you becoming a lawyer or having your MBA, right? So
Wow.
yeah, these things
Yeah.
are pretty recent in development, and you almost like, even though I've come to kind of loathe the Rockefeller approach, I understand it. I go, okay, I can see why you would do this. I don't like it. Now that I know it, I'm going to make sure my children circumnavigate your snake-like plans, but I do understand it, right? So I'm not confused by it. It doesn't leave me in a state of perplexity. But
And that's
yes,
so
that is the history
interesting
of.
when you think about, a family business, especially a farm. If you can be self-sufficient in that sort of way, feed yourself, and we don't want your kid to keep that going on. We want you guys dependent on the government for things.
Us.
So come into our here, it's nice and cozy over here. We'll give you,
Hmm?
adversity, and you can play volleyball and all these little
We'll give you
perks of proms
scholarships.
and yep. And they
Mhm.
lure you
And more than
in.
anything, like, and they give you a like schooling in a traditional sense. And again, not that I'm knocking not that I'm knocking anybody who has encountered life through the traditional school model. I mean, you probably did, I
Sure, I
did,
have,
it's
yeah.
whatever. It's just to say that when you know better, you do better. And so I'm learning that the uh the fabric of it all, like prom and Sadie Hawkins and homecoming and the football and the da da and all the like social aspects outside of the education is what people latch onto. It's
Yeah.
not nobody goes, oh, but what about algebra 2 and calculus? Like nobody says that. It's all about like, no, 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 but what about prom? And oh, well, they won't even have a traditional. Well, how will they be socialized? Right? It's all
Yeah.
about all the things that school is supposed to do that has nothing to do with the actual information you're learning is to the reason
Hmm.
people latch on to what you guess at this point could be called the traditional model of school, even though historically speaking, it was not traditional at all. It's only very recent that this has become the norm.
Yeah. So you brought up algebra. I heard that they are no longer teaching algebra in certain parts of California, and additionally, they're no longer teaching cursive in certain areas as well. So I wanted your thoughts on this. My friend who's from Poland, and she came over here, after she went to college in Poland. Actually, she went to college in Germany, but she's from Poland. Then she came to America, and she said, "Well, it's because your documents are written in cursive. If you can't read the original document, they
Mhm.
can make it say whatever they want." I wanted to get your take on that, because then I've also heard that the
That's
computers can't read the cursive or
typing
something.
cursive.
So, what is your thoughts
So
on the no longer teaching cursive?
my thoughts on why they no longer teach cursive is because they're beginning the transition to modify the English language again, and to do so uh, with clearly nefarious intentions behind it. But more specifically, the modification is so that the narrative can be controlled. He who controls history, or he who is the victor, is the control of history, right? So if you're in a war
Mm,
setting and you win the war, you get to write the books on how things are. The second you can model and remodel a language, you can control and steer even that more. It was presented to me that Alexander the Great, as he's come to be known, was one of the first applications of the subjugation of a people coming by way of the changing of their language. And so
Okay.
he was known in infamy or infamous for being pretty young and having conquered so many territories at such a young age. But it was because Greek was really how he did it, not war. And this Greco-Roman philosophical, kind of heady, conceptual, kind of Plato, Aristotle, Platonic kind of uh, verbiage model is really was his strategy for dividing and conquering, as opposed to just give me your money, give me your give me your land or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So knowing that since antiquity moving forward, great strides have been made in large swaths of human control via language manipulation. Now it makes a whole lot of sense why, okay, we've got Latin, we've got English. English has kind of transformed from Shakespearean era Old English into modern English, and now slang and terms and, like the digital world is making it possible to reinterpret and remix that language. And if you notice, computers, for the most part, don't write in cursive.
Mm-hmm.
So they have, or they don't type in cursive. I think some probably can, or I'm sure there are some applications that can, but for the most part, I believe it is a glyph style that is being phased out because the desire is to terraform the language again, like has
Mm.
happened several times throughout history. And getting rid of cursive is a effective way to do that. Plus, it just limits the student or the learner to even less options to express themselves through contract or for any other reason. While they're getting rid of algebra, it's probably because nobody needed algebra to begin with. Like I remember, like isn't it algebra a squared plus b squared equals c squared? Like
Yeah.
isn't that like the foundational like
Right.
model of solve like trying to identify c by like the square root of c by combining the identifications of the square root of a and b in this kind of formulaic sense. But it's like, aside from algebra teachers, like I'm really not sure who's ever applied algebra in a practical
Right.
sense at
I
all,
mean,
ever.
if
Like
if
I
any of you
really, I
listeners
mean,
have, please send us an email. The
please. I
homeschool
mean,
how
I'm
to
sure
at
you could say, I'm sure
gmail.com.
there's some, I'm sure there's a civil engineer somewhere that was like, oh yes, I use algebra all the time. Or I'm sure there was like a some sort of structural or civil engineering application to it where you're trying to
Hmm.
figure out this support beam needs this much load versus this much load. So how much, should I apply? I'm sure that there are isolated singular events, but as we probably can both ascertain, and if anybody who's listening is truly honest with themselves, most people, and by most I mean 99% of y'all, don't actually use algebra, trigonometry, calculus, none of that stuff
Hmm.
uh, in your actual everyday life. Plus, as from a trajectory standpoint, how sad is it that the model, like the systems and then computing systems we have today, which were clearly being developed and kind of planned and modeled in the late 80s and early, I mean, computers existed in the 80s and 90s, but like the idea of computing growing to the point of being able to do all the calculus for you was already well underway when people like me, who's only 38, was learning calculus 20 or whatever years ago.
Hmm.
So it's almost like y'all knew we wasn't gonna need this. Y'all knew by the time we was adults, we was gonna be like, Siri, what is a squared plus b? We don't want to have to actually use it yet. We were still required to like go through the motions, take
Right.
that SAT, get that like 800 or whatever.
I mean, there are
So it's
questions
like,
like that on civil service exams. For again, for what I don't
mhm.
know, but it's not like it relates to any job. I don't know. Is it the process
No,
of
I think it's like
thinking? But
I think it's like a how smart are you question. Like,
mm,
how good are you at remembering things that we told you was important? That's what that question's for. Do you
wow.
remember the
Oh,
quadratic equation? Some
wow.
old
Okay.
horse came a hopping through our alley. Sine over cosine, tangent, and carry the two, and da da da. Like I remember my trig teacher had this whole mnemonic for remembering the quadratic equation. And it was kind of just like, I remember the fact that it was a thing, but what the quadratic equation is, how it's applicable, I'm pretty sure nobody knew then, nobody knows now.
No, I couldn't even give you the definition of a quadratic equation, honestly.
I
Uh,
couldn't either. It's like that's the calculus one, I think. Maybe I don't.
okay.
All my math folk who are listening, don't quote me on that. It's been a minute, and clearly it doesn't matter unless you're a trig teacher or a math teacher, calculus teacher.
So, as you bring up the AI, how do you think that is going to affect kids in school? I mean, I feel like there was internet. So, well, I don't even know when I was in college. I mean, there was an internet, but it wasn't on your phone. You had to like sit at a computer in a
Right.
library or you know,
Hmm.
dial up to AOL or something. But now,
Hmm.
from what I understand, it will write a whole paper for you, and teachers are trying to figure out ways to. It was this written by a like so. How do you think is it going to be that kids are getting dumber or not learning what they need to learn, or are they getting smarter because they're learning the ways to get around what they got to do?
So smarter. So okay, when you say smarter or dumber, usually those words are applied in an empirical sense, meaning someone's either collectively smarter than they would have otherwise been, or collectively dumber. I think what's
Mhm.
happening is both. Kids are getting specifically smarter and collectively dumber. And I
Okay, that
can't
makes
even say kids.
sense.
I'm saying people.
Yeah, that
So
makes sense.
smarter in the sense of figuring out ways to find bespoke solutions for things. If I lined up 100 problems, 5 or 10 of them would be approachable in a way where the collective person is now smarter at learning how to solve them. But I believe that 90% of them, or 9 out of 10 of them, would be dumber at generally figuring out how to solve problems, because as a collective the trend seems to be that thinking outside the box is not a skill that is being taught. Problem solving in a creative fashion, creative problem solving where you're given a complex or simple problem and you're not given multiple choice as to what the potential answer could be, where you just have to work it out yourself, that is on the decline. Being able to apply a formula to a series, to a problem, and have a multiple choice answer where one of these four is the right one, I just got to figure out, that is becoming, I feel like, easier to do, especially when it comes to mobile phones and things like chat gpt or similar services where you can have the AI do the learning for you. But it really does seem that the point is to dumb everybody down while at the
Hmm.
same time convincing everyone that they're smarter. So, in order to do
Oh,
that, you
yeah.
have to make people specifically smarter but generally dumber.
Wow.
And I think that that general dumbness comes as a overall lack of um, unqualifiable, or I should say unquantifiable things like discernment, right?
Yeah.
Discernment is, should you trust this dude who's lied to you 57 times? This company that has made products that have harmed people in the past, are they the most trustworthy company to give you the solution so that you're not harmed today? The
Hmm.
average person has proven to not be able to have that basic level of discernment.
Right.
And wink, wink,
Or
nudge, nudge. I think you
yeah, care to research it on their own. We trust
work.
people wearing a white coat or, you know, in a business attire, just like the
Mhm.
what was the experiment where the
The
guy was
Milgram
just
experiment, is that the
Milgram
one?
experiment, Stanley Milgram's experiment, where he told them, okay, zap the guy on the other side of the curtain. And people
Mhm.
were doing it, even though some of them, you know, they were under the
Didn't
impression they were
want to.
dying over there, but they kept hitting the button to kill him and hurt him because a guy in a white coat told them to do it. So
Mhm.
it is
Yep.
crazy.
And
I
you
mean,
brought up
so
something
that's
just
not
now.
even recent.
Right. That's like old, like 40, 50 years now. You mentioned something that I wanted to highlight about people feeling like they don't have the desire to research something and they'd rather kind of outsource their trust or their decision to someone in a coat or with a title. I feel like the The last 3 years, and for anybody listening, we're recording this in 2023, so you probably know what saga we're all talking about over the last 3 years. But the last 3 years proved that I think that the conditioning has become such where people don't actually feel like they're capable of researching.
Mm,
That's what I really saw. Like I saw a lot of people going, "Okay, I want to make the right decision here. My gut is telling me I don't know that I should be afraid of this." And that very much varied depending on how much mainstream news you were watching. But
mhm,
for the average, right in the middle, I don't know if I'm afraid of this to the degree that the TV is telling me I should, but I want to do the right thing. I don't really know what any of these words mean, and I don't feel like
mm,
I have the time to learn what they mean. Plus, I feel like even if I did know what the words mean, I might still make the wrong decision since this seems above my pay grade in terms of the subject matter, like epidemiology, like epidemic science. So I guess I'll
ACE2
defer or
receptor.
outsource
Yeah.
my. Yeah, exactly. What is an ACE2 receptor? What is immunity? Like these types of things. So I guess I will defer my decision or outsource my decision to an authoritative figure who seems like he's an expert or who I'm told. I don't at this point they don't even have to seem like they're an expert. They just have to say expert underneath their
Hmm.
name on the bottom of the
Hmm.
screen. And therefore that person is in a position to give me information on how I treat my body and my children's body, right? But I really noticed this whole like, well, you should leave this up to the experts, or you're not a doctor, so how would you really know, right? And it's almost to say like, you good, bro? Like you sitting there acting as if you're too scared to make a decision because you feel like you might make the wrong decision because you're not confident that you can actually make the right decision. It's not
Hmm.
even so much about me. So you feel like you might not make the right decision. And so
Hmm.
you're trying to warn me not to make the wrong decision because you don't think that I'm capable of discerning or educating
Right.
myself to the point of being able to make a discernibly accurate decision for my own well-being and my children.
Right.
And that's really what I think that the education system in a net has done. It has
Mm.
it has said you go to math class to learn about math. You go to English class to learn about English. You go to chemistry class to learn about chemistry. And then if you finish those classes and then you enter graduate school and then postgraduate school, to then become an expert in one type of application of this understanding. At this point, now it is okay for you to stamp expert on your chest and proceed with making decisions for you and others. But until then, so you're in debt, all them thousands of dollars for all them student loans and all this. You're not allowed to make a decision. You have to sit down, shut up, and let that guy over there who did incur all that programming make the decision for you. And that's the part where I think that that's really what I ultimately think the point of the Rockefeller inspired educational model is doing. It's saying petroleum based products under the umbrella of the Rockefeller dynasty, these are obviously better for you. Don't ask me how, but they are. So if your decision on what you're supposed to do as far as health is concerned is not involving one of the Rockefeller products, then I don't know what to make of that because all we've been given is the model and one way of how to solve this problem. Things like naturopathic medicine, for example, or like, oh, that's a quack, and that's another big thing I noticed during the whole
Yes.
pandemic is just how inflammatory and extreme all of the terms were. It was either like an expert or a quack. There's
Yeah.
nothing in between an expert and a quack. Like you either like this guy right here, he's a genius. This guy right here is the dumbest person on earth, and there's literally nothing in between.
There's nothing in between.
So I'm like,
Well,
there's
if
nothing in
you
between, and
watched
it's almost like there's no room.
the High Wire,
Go ahead.
it would have been 2 weeks
Hmm.
ago. He had on Neil deGrasse Tyson, and that was a
I
very,
watched it.
very interesting interview. I
Mm,
mean,
we
that
can say
crushed my
interesting.
dreams
Oh, I
too, man.
want to.
I
Oh, that's
loved
right. I forgot
watching.
you like
I loved
Neil
watching
deGrasse Tyson.
Cosmos. I mean, That maybe
Yeah.
they lied to me in that too, but that just crushed everything too.
Yolanda, Bill Nye, all of them. Listen, I'm right there with you because I forget. So I grew up in North Carolina in a conservative model. Then I went and worked in Los Angeles, and for over a decade was in a liberal mindset and like model. And I very much like voted for Bush, and then later voted for Obama. Right, so I've kind of gone like this in terms of the political spectrum. And I was actually at the Obama inauguration. Right, so I had a very favorable view of the Democratic Party at the time. But I missed the Neil deGrasse Tyson generation because I was Bill Nye, and then by the time Neil deGrasse Tyson was kind of becoming more of a name in the conversation, I was kind of not into that subject. So I knew who he was, but I was like,
Mhm.
well, whatever. And then more recently, I was kind of like, oh gosh, Neil deGrasse Tyson, like this dude, it's like I'm supposed to like him or whatever because he's black and I'm black, but I could punch the mustache off this dude. Like I just can't
Really?
stand how he presents what he does. And again, I felt that way about Bill Nye and others too. So it wasn't just him. But when I saw that High Wire episode with Del Bigtree and Neil deGrasse Tyson, I just remember being like, bro, everybody's only here to watch y'all talk about this injectable, and you spending every microsecond avoiding talking about this injectable.
Yeah,
Cut to the
why
chase. Like we get it that you're an astrophysicist, but we're not. Okay, so
he
like
goes
know your audience, bro.
he goes, "Well, why do you have me on this show? Why are you asking me these questions?" Well, cuz you have a documentary coming out about it. Why are you making a
Right,
documentary
exactly.
about a subject if
Why
you're
you
an
make a documentary?
astrophysicist?
Right, and you don't know what the heck you're
Yeah,
talking
that
about.
was it.
It's almost
He
like
actually
this is
came
this is
to
the thing with Neil.
he came to a theater here like 2 months ago, and I was like, oh, I should go see him
Mhm.
because I watched Cosmos, and you know, he tells a story about him growing up watching Carl Sagan do the original Cosmos and all that, but I couldn't. But I've been to the Hayden
You
Planetarium,
know,
but that was when I still loved
okay.
him.
So, well, this is what I know. Men are men, women are women, and we don't know what we don't know. So I look at people like Neil deGrasse Tyson and I go, he probably genuinely believes what he's talking about. And what he doesn't understand, like I didn't either, is the scope at which one's smarts can be exploited with a few foundational pieces being withheld from the conversation. And we could get,
Hmm.
there's a zillion explanations or assumptions as to what those foundational pieces could be. But I maintain that the foundational withholdings are motive driven, meaning if Nelson Rockefeller just happened to not tell you, Neil deGrasse Tyson, that the entire basis for the funding of research and clinical research and peer review and things like this were always only ever exclusively to support his industry. And he just happened to not mention that to you.
Right.
But here you go running off, drawing conclusions as to things and taking Pluto out of the planetary lineup and things like that because you're a science guy and you really like that. And Nelson Rockefeller, who is the gentleman who printed every single book you've probably written to get to your high accolade of academia, he was not an astrophysicist and concerned about the cosmos either. He was concerned about making money for him
Hmm.
and his folk and his children with just withholding just that one piece of information, which isn't even politically biased. It's not like it doesn't draw any bearing on the earth or any of the actual numbers. It's simply like, listen, we trying to make money, bro. Like we trying to get this bag. We trying to actually profit in the future. And so because of that, I'm not going to tell you about the 67 other alternatives that could explain this phenomenon. We're just going to go with this one because that drives money back into our, like just withholding that one piece of information is enough to have a whole entire rational adults grow into a field of belief
Hmm.
that is thwarted. That is it's like a great example is let's say a maniacal like brain like mentally deranged father of a child who wants narcissistic attention drawn upon himself decides to hide his kid in a closet or in a cellar underneath the house and call the police and say, yo, my child is missing, I think they were kidnapped. Simple, Like essentially, in an entire missing children's investigation, that is the central and really only lie that was ever told. I don't know where my kid is. It's missing. Please help. Everybody from that moment forward is operating altruistically. They're like, oh, wow. Okay, so a kid is missing. Okay, what can we do? Put out an APB, send out an Amber Alert. Let's get a search party. Was it over here? What were they wearing? Well, if so and so, what kind of van was it? Oh, okay, it was a Chevy Astra. Okay, no, it was a Dodge Caravan. Okay, what was the color? Right? There's all these people trying to be useful in terms of applying any sort of help that they can to the situation to get to the bottom of where this missing child is. And really, the only deceptive element of the thing is the very initial phone call that said, "Hey, my kid's missing. I don't know where they are." Everything past that is good people trying to do a good thing, totally fumbling into themselves and into reality in terms of how to make that happen. John
I
Benet
didn't know
Ramsey comes to
I didn't know
mind as
where
a
you were going with that, but boy, you brought that right back around. That makes a lot of sense. And when you think about
so
schooling, yeah, how much is it that you don't know what you don't know with the schooling? How many little tidbits were left out, especially around these wars, we're living the whole Ukraine situation right now and seeing um, different sides, I guess, if you want to pay attention. There's a lot of, I mean, really all the countries in the world just happens to be where Hunter Hunter was working or like come on, there's a lot of
exactly.
countries in this world. That's a coincidence,
Right.
man. Like 10
Right,
years
right,
ago we were
right,
saying
exactly.
we're not delivering the pallets of money if you investigate my son's
Right.
company in Ukraine. Okay, but
Burisma,
that's
yeah,
all right,
exactly.
But so and then how is that going to be written in the textbooks going forward, or is the
Oh,
Chat GPT going to flip that
gonna
around
rewrite
when
it
you
for
ask it a
you.
question? Yeah, I mean, just this.
The revolutionary Hunter Biden was trying to solve world hunger. This is why he had set up a company in Ukraine. It's
Through paintings, through his good paintings.
right,
We were
exactly.
just driving down to JFK 2 weeks ago to go to Myrtle Beach for break, and I said to my niece, who's 20, I'm like, "Oh, look, there's where 9/11. There's where the Twin Towers used to stand." She's like, "Oh, like it didn't even phase her at all." I'm like, "Wait,
Wow.
were you alive?" No. I'm like, "Really? What did you learn in school about it?" And she's like, "Yeah, I know we learned about it." But she didn't even have any recollection. And then here I go. You
Wow.
want to know
But
the
she,
truth? Do you
did
want to
she,
know the truth, Haley?
you want to know the real truth? She's like, cool story, Auntie.
Yeah, crazy Aunt Cheryl.
I know, right? Crazy on
So,
Cheryl.
yes, that's what I am known as. Now let me ask you this. So I got thinking about this the other day. We had a situation with our school. We're like a podunk town in upstate New York. But they had a whole like school shooting like thing going on there. I know my nephew, he had heard about it and was afraid to tell anyone because he didn't want to be targeted. Like he had heard that something was going to happen, but he didn't want to tell the authorities because he was afraid he'd be targeted if it were true.
Oh,
And
wow.
it was a whole big thing. And I just got thinking about this, like these the shelter in place drills and all this stuff that's going on in the schools today. There's got to be something bigger to that. Is there like a
Of course.
trauma based thing that you think is going on with that?
Yes, I do. I absolutely do because I learned like a lot of the earlier part of my research was built around learning about trauma-based mind control.
Hmm.
And I remember seeing people explain all the time. They do this trauma-based mind control at the macro and the micro scale. So on a micro sense, trauma-based mind control is applied to an individual by physically torturing them or physically harming them and then harming them to the point of dissociation, which is really a natural your body's natural coping mechanism when it has a pain that has crossed a certain threshold or when a injustice is being done where it can't rationalize the why behind the injustice. So it chooses to detach your psyche from your physical body, which is known as dissociation. And then trauma-based mind control is about inflicting dissociation on a person or inducing dissociation in a person and then nurturing the dissociated half or portion of that individual over time through conditioning so that you can create the trauma on cue and then the dissociated half is a useful entity or alter, if you will, for weaponization purposes. But on the macro scale, trauma-based mind control happens when you're constantly making people I mean, even like the death counter, like
Mm.
the death number, the death toll that was on TV, that's a form of trauma, the macro level trauma based mind control, because it
Yep.
was, you were constantly seeing people, someone's dying, someone else died, like look, 5 people just died in the last minute. Now, was that accurate? Probably not. If it was because they were being killed and it was being labeled as a brand new disease. But nevertheless, the mind control worked because people had developed such a fear after about 6 or 7 months of seeing death, 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 death,
Hmm.
death on the TV screen, that they made decisions that were against their own personal well-being, or at least against their own personal gut feeling. Many of them, like, I don't really want this, but I guess I'm gonna get it because I don't want to die. When that only was applicable because of macro level trauma based mind control programming. So, in the case of the shooting, like in New York, what they do is they exacerbate a potential. There have been guns since before there has been America.
Yeah,
There
that
have
was
been
near me.
schools. Yeah,
That the shooting where the girl
that
drove
was
to the
near you.
guy's that it was kind of near us. Yeah, yeah, we're in upstate New York.
Oh,
Because
really?
I
I didn't know
almost was
that.
like, what? And then I was like, all right, well, let me get more details on this now because now I'm intrigued. So go on.
Hmm. So, yeah, this trauma based mind control on a macro scale is very effective because what it does is it instills a normal, it like shifts the line of normalcy. Here's a great separate example that totally applies in this case. And I was just having this conversation this past weekend. It is commonly understood that, oh, when you leave your house, you absolutely must lock your door. Like at night, oh, did you lock the front door? Oh, you got to lock it. Make sure you lock the door.
Mm,
Now, we were at a house as some friends this past weekend in the country. So anybody who ever grew up in the country knows, maybe you lock your door, maybe you don't, but you know all the neighbors, everybody's, all about God and country. So if you don't lock them, whatever. But I was talking to my wife and the friends we were staying with about how people have a legitimate fear that their stuff or their safety is going to be impeded on if they don't lock their front door or they don't lock their car door. Now, again, I'm not saying don't lock your door or don't lock your car. I'm simply saying think about however old you are from the day you were born to today, how many times your car or your front door has been entered by someone unauthorized. I can think zero or one
mm.
time. Now, we have been robbed before, but it was by someone we knew. And if you ask any police department or investigative reporter, they'll tell you that most robberies happen from people you know. A strung out, meth addicted nephew, some random babysitter who, just random person. But most people proceed through life as if I don't lock my front door, multiple robbers every night go from house to house and just tugging on doors and looking for the open one. And if
You're
they
so
happen to come
right.
to mine tonight and I forgot to lock it, then all my stuff's gone tomorrow morning. But
Right.
the truth of the
Meanwhile,
matter
like
is
if
that
it's
you
summer
could
and it's
live
hot out, every window's open and all they have to do is cut through a screen.
cut through a screen. Or if they used to work at ADT or Sonatrol or any one of these companies, just cut the phone line. And then your security system's disarmed. It's like there's a zillion ways to gain access to a house. Most people's front doors have glass on them. You just break the glass. You know what I'm saying?
Hmm.
So the reason I gave that example is because there has been through my lifetime, again, I'm 38, a tremendous amount of movies and media and the local news. Anson County Sheriff have there was a highway robbery, a house robbery, da 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 da. So you hear it on TV, and everybody who's
Mhm.
sitting at their house in the county that's adjacent to the county that the robbery took place is all like, "Oh wow, crime is going up in my neighborhood. So if I don't actually lock my door and set my alarm code, all my stuff's gone tomorrow." And the
Mhm.
truth of the matter is that if you never locked your house a day in your life, 99% of y'all would still have all the stuff in your house. Why?
Right.
Because robbers don't just go to random houses and look to see which door is open. That's the quickest way to get arrested. Furthermore, they don't know if what happens behind your door is of any value. So like most police will tell you that robbers are either strategically looking for, like they're either like posing as the AC repair guy or the bug repellent Terminator man or whatever, gaining access to your house to scope it out, then later coming back to hit in a targeted fashion. It's not random, and it's certainly not every night. Robbers are just going from car door and house to house to try to open it. Oh, this one's open. Hey, come in. Let's get out.
Well, maybe
So
in
this type
Chicago.
of social condition, maybe, right, 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 maybe in Chicago, but outside of Chicago, everywhere else, like, again, I'm not suggesting people don't lock their doors. I'm just saying if you had to tally
Right.
up in your life, how many times the door was not jiggled or the car alarm did not go off because some random stranger was just tugging at the door handle trying to open it to see if it was unlocked. The answer would be 99.999% of the time, you never would have technically even needed to lock your door because nobody was trying to steal it. But if you ask the average American, oh, you got to lock your door at night. What are you talking about? You're crazy if you don't. You're
Well,
crazy.
and it
You're crazy. What are you trying to get robbed?
it's interesting because when you think of like when the mass shootings are reported on the news, a mass shooting now is anywhere where four people are killed or injured, it says. And I
Injured,
just
right?
read that the other
Mhm.
day. Killed or injured. So wait, if four people get like a bruise because a gun hit them on the head, as like is that a mass
It's a
shooting? I
mass
mean,
shooting.
how are
Oh
they?
yes.
Why are they? Obviously, I know why they're wording it this way to make it so that there are more
Hmm.
mass shootings. But why do they want to do that to us so that we succumb to just kind of their protective powers?
I think it's that, and I also think that it's like a lot of people would think that it's to campaign about removing guns. I'm one of the people who don't think that that's the reason. I don't think they want to take Americans' guns at all. I mean, I think in an idealist world, they could say, "Yeah, give us all your guns," but outside of the fact that they know we don't live in an idealist world, I don't think they want to take them at all. I simply think that they want people to be people. They want gun owners to be afraid that they're going to be taken so that they're more ready to use them against their neighbor. And they want
Oh,
non-gun owners to champion the cause of why we shouldn't ever need guns so that a dialectic exists. Two
yeah.
extremes, like the expert and the quack, exist. There's no middle ground. There's nobody that says, "Oh yeah, you want a
Yeah.
gun? I don't have one, but if you want one, sure." They don't want that. They want people like you shouldn't have guns, and you're evil if you do. Or they want
Mhm.
people going, "I got 38 of them, and I'll shoot you if you step on my porch trying to take them."
You're so
That's all they
right
want is
because
these two extremes.
the divided fighting people will not come together and show their government that we can survive without you. If we're fighting, we're divided.
Correct.
And that's kind of,
We're
I mean,
divided, and
brought me to that conclusion, a couple years ago with just some of the things that you had, videos that you had on your podcast and answers that you had to some of my questions. And it's so true. I see it
well, cool.
everywhere now.
Yeah,
Wow.
if you're
So,
divided, you're not fighting, or you're not
because
fighting
part of
together, I should say. Oh,
the premise of my podcast is, why are people homeschooling? How is it done? What are all the
mhm.
different ways you can do it? And how does it differ from, state to state? We all have different laws. And should I homeschool my kids? And as I was thinking about this with the shelter in place, the having like my nephews go through this experience of, oh, there is someone threatening. That's traumatic on its own. But
Mhm.
even the shelter in place drills, those are traumatic on their own. So, if I send my child to school, do I think they are going to get shot and killed? Probably not. Like you said, they're if you leave your door unlocked, they're probably not coming into your house and stealing your stuff that night. They're probably not going to get shot and killed. But is that the point? No, the point is I don't want them to go through a childhood of this trauma based mind control where they are doing shelter in place
Mhm.
drills or they hear something from someone else and have to feel that they have to go tell an authority, but they shouldn't tell an authority because they don't want to be targeted. And that
Right.
is all trauma based mind
Right.
control. And do we want to put our
That's
children
all.
through
Yeah.
that? Okay, I
I
just
know
came
the
full
answer.
circle in my own mind.
No, I don't. Yeah. Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you
Jeez.
that's a like that's another thing that I think people like the homeschool conversation doesn't even factor in. I'm glad you brought that up, is because most people are thinking about the educational aspect or the socialization aspect, but they don't think about the trauma-based mind control that comes with bullying. And
Hmm.
again, that's like it varies state to state, city to city, school to
Hmm.
school. But the drills and the like federal mandates that schools are required to, um, more or less put the students through. Now we have things like, it used to be No Child Left Behind, but you have critical race theory education. There's all kinds of like new types of problems to really assess that weren't
Hmm.
even like things that anybody would have thought about years ago. And I get the impression that a revolution is coming because what's happening is that you can't put people under a oppressive model for too long. People the masses do revolt. There's nobody that just gets oppressed into oblivion where you just cower into yourself and then you die
Mm.
off as a
Right.
species or as a people group. That doesn't happen. What ends up happening is revolutions and coup d'etats and all kinds of different things happen so that the governing model is changed once the level of threat or oppression gets past a certain either amount or past a certain length of time. So I love the idea, like, I have a 3.5 year old and we 100,000% are homeschooling her. But I have come up with what I think is going to be, at least I'm going to stress test this, my initial approach to homeschooling, starting in the preschool days, that I would absolutely love to share with you and just get your thoughts on it. Because, I wasn't homeschool, I went to traditional school. But now, there's no question. I don't even think I'd send my daughter to the same school that I went to because I went back to my high
No.
school during the pandemic and I looked around and was like, y'all are just complying with every single mandate, dictate, and situation because you have to, even though
Mhm.
you're private, so you don't technically have to, but you have to. And I don't want my daughter to be a part of this. Plus, I had a great athletics program and things, but as an individual with a little bit more of a hands-on approach, I could have even provided a better I can provide a better situation for my daughter than was provided for me. Not that I think my parents did a bad job, but simply because I now know more. So
Mhm.
my model and my approach is this, and I'm going to call it, I think, the 5 minute classroom or the 5 minute school session. And the idea is that every day there's 30 things on a piece of paper that we learn about. But each one of those 30 things we spend about 5 minutes on. I think this would scale as she gets older with these little kitties' attention spans. You know how that be. So what we will do, and I've already done this a couple times. When we'll go to the playground or to the park or something, I'll be like, okay, so today we're doing 5 minute school. So you have to think of 5 things you're interested in learning. And in my day, I take my daughter, who's 3.5, and I stop what I'm doing and I talk to her, squat down, get on her level, and educate her on the things that we see in and around on our life. And we
Mhm.
make it a point to have a number so that it's not just about like, oh, today we didn't do anything, tomorrow we did 5 things, the next day we didn't. It's every day it's a certain amount of things. And an example I'll give you is we're going to the park and we see a fire hydrant. And I go, okay, 5 minute schooling, fire hydrants. So we go up to the fire hydrant. I'm crouching down and I'm like, do you know what this is? No. Okay, this is what's called a fire hydrant. Can you say hydrant? Okay, hydrant, hydrant. Let's spell it, right? So we're dealing with spelling, we're dealing with phonics and enunciation. And then I go, do you know the reason this is here? Well, I don't know. Well, the reason this fire hydrant here is because if somebody's house catches on fire, then the fire trucks will need a place to get water in order to put that fire out. You know that the fire and water don't really work together when you have a fire, unless it's a grease fire. You put water on it, and that's how you quench the fire. Oh, okay. So yes. So this hydrant is yellow, and why is this one yellow? Why is the one over there red? Do you know that the different colors mean something different? Oh, I didn't know that. Yes, the yellow ones have a certain pressure, the red ones have a little bit more water pressure, the orange ones and the green ones, like the colors matter about how much pounds, like what the water pressure is. And we'll take 5 or so minutes and just no phones, no. And it's just me and her talking directly about a thing. And it could be literally anything. Because
Mhm.
I thought about that one day. I said, you could teach your kid a lot about the way this world works just by stopping, crouching down, getting their attention, making them focus, and just looking at whatever it is, a mailbox, a doorbell, a tree, a bush, a construction car, the little green box where the telephone equipment goes, like anything. And so what we try to do is every day we have a series of things that we try to take 5 minute school and we're learning about this fire hydrant in this example. And then once we got that done, we're good to go. And what I noticed is that like a week later, she's like, Daddy, fire hydrant. I'm like, oh yeah, that's right.
Oh,
This one is orange. Like, oh yeah, or yellow rather. Yeah, no, yeah, you're right. I was like, remember what the yellow means? And then these are moments where you can reinforce the things you
yeah,
taught them. And
yeah.
sometimes we revisit the same thing. But I'm thinking, as opposed to an 8 hours of sitting learning about an abstract application of a thing, why not take a few minutes, be it 5 or 10, or if they're older children, maybe 15 or something longer,
Hmm.
and you're learning all the different, you're learning language, physics, English, construction, all these
In
things
one.
uh,
In one. Hmm.
in one about a specific subject, about a specific object, I should say.
Hmm.
And that's kind of what that's been me and my wife's approach. Like, okay, we're gonna start this because we're definitely gonna do curriculums and workbooks and more homeschool type things when she's older. But at least now we're like, let's start it with this 5 minute school idea.
Yeah, and some people don't even add the workbooks. I mean, maybe in high school, but when they're young, it's there's
Hmm.
this whole unschooling approach, which is very similar to that. And I love that so much. I mean, market that like market that and target that as your own. Put the stamp on it. But that's awesome. And it brings
Five
me
minute
back
school.
to yeah, it brings me back to thinking, I talk on the podcast a lot about my son he's in a preschool right now, 3 days a week for 2.5 hours. And that has been so eye opening to me. And a couple weeks ago or months ago, they sent home a letter. Hey, we're working on letters. They're 3 and 4 year olds. And they're like, get the flashcards out because the kids really need to learn their letters. So I'm doing these flashcards. Colin, what's this? I don't know. Okay, well, it's a T. 2 minutes later, Colin, what's this? I don't know. It's a T. It's not getting it right. And
Yeah,
I presented it
yeah.
on the podcast and talked to other parents, and they're like, yeah, no. One, it's got no context to him. And two, he's just not ready. He's 4. He's just not ready. He has
Hmm.
no
Hmm.
desire to learn what a T is. If you wait till he wants to read instructions on how to build a monster truck and then he needs to know what a T is so he can read the directions, then he's going to want to know. He's going to say, Mom, can you help
Hmm.
me read? And it's so true too because I thought to myself one day, does he know why he's got to know the letter T? Because like does he know it has a sound attached to it? And then all the other, 26, 25 other letters, they have a sound. When you put the sounds together, it makes a word. And the words together make a sentence. And the sentence together makes, a story. But that I don't think they explain that off the bat. I don't remember them explaining that in school. It's just, here's letter A. And then you learn A is for
Mm-mm.
ah. Or I love when it says A is for ah. Like, what does is for mean? A is
Four.
for?
Right. Yeah, exactly.
What?
A is
A
four,
is
but
for
I thought four
apple.
is four. Like,
Yeah,
what do you
A
mean A
is
is
for
four?
apple. But no, A begins or apple begins with A. That would be the proper